Today I want to talk about Claude on Bedrock. Now there are many reasons why you should choose a Claude on an enterprise deployment path instead of directly with Anthropic. Most companies will choose one of the four paths because they don't want their data to be routed to Anthropic, which is in US. So with the big hyperscalers, you will have local data centers and you probably already have an environment with them. So your corporate data can stay within the data boundaries and meet your compliance. Anthropic supports 4 different paths at the moment. You can call Anthropic directly, or you can serve your model via Amazon Bedrock or Google's Vertex or Microsoft Foundry. Now just FYI, the Microsoft Foundry is a very light integration that only taking care of your billings. So the real viable solution is actually via Amazon Bedrock or the Google Vertex only. The first difference you might notice is instead of signing up an enterprise plan with Anthropic directly, you will not need to do that, and you also don't, and you lose the Anthropic signing. You wouldn't have an admin portal for Claude because everything will be bundled with your cloud providers. You will not need a separate account with Anthropic. With our example with Amazon Bedrock, it's just with your Amazon AWS account. And all the configurations will be managed by you, including the models. So it might not be as intuitive as you have a direct model with Anthropic. You lose all those controls, but you can still manage them by the settings. And instead of calling the model directly with Anthropic hosted infrastructure, mostly in US, you will be calling the model to your enterprise hosted instance, whether it's in the Bedrock or the Google Vertex. And then you can manage with all the other services that come with the GCP or AWS or the monitorings, billings, they are all integrated. So it is definitely a viable path for enterprise, although the setup and the way to get it working is a bit finicky at the moment. So let's see how we're gonna set it up. And in the following videos, I will expand with local MCP connectors, Office add-ins, and so on. We will be also talking about web groundings, guardrails, reportings, telemetries, etc. And just FYI, on Bedrock, there are some limitations with web groundings. So we will explain later in the videos. Claude's documentation is quite fragmented at this stage. They are quite messy actually, because so many changes. Now I've fed all the documentation I can find to my codex, so it knows the context, it knows what we need to do. But I'm gonna anchor my walkthrough based on this documentation, deploy cowork on 3P as third party with Amazon Bedrock. And I will switch between documentations, but I will provide all the references in the end. Now the first thing we need to do is to choose the right authentication approach. Now think about this, we are an enterprise that running Microsoft Entra as the main IDP, and everything is single sign-on. We have federated the Amazon AWS to our Entra tenant, so the users that we're going to test have already been synchronized to Amazon. So that is our context. Now there are 4 supported authentication approach. Number 1 is using the bearer token. That's going to be a secret deployed to endpoint. We don't want to do that. Then you have the in-app AWS signing with the inference Bedrock SSO key, and it says this is broad rollout to users without AWS tooling. User can sign in through the IAM Identity Center inside app, which we already enabled. No AWS CLI required. And this is the approach we're going to take. Now the other approach I see is called profile based. This one's called developer who already using the AWS CLI. And IT can distribute this config file directly, user can just run it. So this requires AWS CLI v2 to be installed. And who needs this method? It's for developers who already are using the AWS CLI daily and they're familiar with native tooling, and you don't need to use MDM to deploy your settings to the group of users. You can just use AWS config file to distribute the settings directly. So this is great for testings, for getting your onboard pilot users onboarded and tested. And the last one, we're not already running a LLM proxy, so we're gonna take this number 2. If a static credential in the managed profile is acceptable but Bedrock API key is not, you can also set the inference credential helper to executable that prints Bedrock bearer token at the runtime. Okay, so we don't need to do this because we are not going via this named profile approach. We're gonna go with in-app AWS signing. I think this is the cleanest for a Microsoft Entra-based single sign-on environment. 3 steps are performed regardless which authentication approach you choose. Okay, so let's follow this one by one. Step number 1, we need to ensure the models in the Bedrock are enabled. So let's go have a look. Coming to the model access page on Bedrock. Model access page has been retired. Serverless foundation models are now automatically enabled across all AWS commercial regions, and you do not need to manually activate model access through this page anymore. Okay, that's great. To get started, simply select model from model catalog and open it. So how do you find out the model details in your configuration? Now, there are a few things we need to do with the Bedrock. First of all, when you come to the Bedrock model catalog, if this is the first time you're using it, Anthropic requires first-time customers to submit use case before evoking the model. Okay, so we have to do that before we can use it. Now we'll come to this Cloud Sonnet 4.6. Open that, and we're gonna submit use case details. So let's do that quickly. Click Submit Use Case Details, and then we wait. I don't know who's approving it, how long it's gonna take. Now on the model page, you can see the model ID, but this is not the inference profile ID you can use in your configurations, but this just represents the model that lives on the Anthropic. Then you have the inference type, which is called cross-region inference. Actually, if you go back to the model catalog, you can see pretty much all models are cross-region inference. And let me explain what that means. So if you click on the cross-region inference, it says you can carry out cross-region inference with cross-region inference profiles. This model can only be used through a inference profile. Let's click on Learn More. What is cross-region inference? It is for increased throughput. Pretty much it will help you to boost the performance by connecting to the nearest data center. That is what increased throughput with cross-region mean. So I'll show you how we can find out what model it uses. So first, on this page, Amazon Bedrock User Guide, you go to your model, and you can see, for me, I'm going to use Cloud Sonnet 4.6 AU for Australia. Now, these are the cross-region. There's one in Sydney and one in Melbourne. So basically, this is the inference ID you're going to use in your profile. And when it says cross-region capable, that means it will route to these regions within this profile as needed, as long as it can increase users' throughput, the experience. But you also need to be very strategic about what model you're providing. If you are providing these region models, then what if your users travel overseas and their Claude Desktop will run like a turtle because you are forcing them to come back to Australia? And for the same reason, if you use this global inference ID for the model. That means your user might get a great performance everywhere they go, but that means your data is traveling to your other regions AWS infrastructure. So you need to check with the compliance department whether that is okay. Now for our demo, we're going to use this AU endpoint for our inference. Then it goes on to explain we need to do a IAM Identity Center permission set. Bring this back. We need to create a permission set and then assign to the users that we have synchronized from Entra. A federal identity center to your IDP, which I already did. I'm sorry about that. We already federated AWS to our IDP, which is Microsoft Entra. If your organization uses Microsoft Entra ID as a identity provider, you can configure it as an identity source, which I will show you shortly. And then we have already assigned the users to the permission set. That's great. They need to use Claude to rebuild this website. It's terrible. And then that's it. This is a very simple step of what we need to do within the AWS. Now I'm going to do this using our codex. So please go ahead and execute. Go complete the setup AWS steps and provide me with a summary of what has been completed. And we'll be back shortly and I will show you everything will be configured. So the codex has completed its AWS setup portion. So what it has done is to change the session from 4 to 8 hours. Okay, maybe one a bit longer. Then we check the permissions, check the assignments, which we already did. And then these are inline policies, what it does. Okay, so let's switch back to our documentation. Basically, first one to enable the model. Let's keep doing that. That's not required anymore. Now we have this minimum inline policy that needs to have allow on the Bedrock invoke model and Bedrock invoke model with response tree. And then you can set the session duration between 8 to 12 hours. Right. And these we already done. Assign the user to the permission set. And then let's switch back to our Bedrock and have a look at the permission set. Now the permission set is set to 8 hours. That's great. And then if you scroll down, this is inline policy. Now what this inline policy does is allow the groups that in this account to do that. So this is the boundary what the users in this group can access on AWS. And this is the boundary. So basically what it says is there are evoke model and evoke model with response stream. That's the minimum required from documentation. And we also have the Converse API, which I will explain later when it comes to guardrail. And then the resource is pretty much any Sonnet models, right? We use the wildcard. And we will define what exactly model the user can see from the Claude Desktop client-side configurations. Okay, the AWS side has been taken care of. Now let's have a look at the client side, what we need to do with the devices. Prepare devices. It depends on which authentication approach you choose. So we're gonna go with the in-app AWS sign-in. What does it feel like? No per device preparation is required. Distribute the 4 inference Bedrock SSO keys in the managed configurations, which we are going to use Intune and the platform to distribute that. So when you launch the app, you will see signing with AWS page on the first launch. Very natural. Then you run through the IAM Identity Center device authorization flow in the system browser. And then the token will be passed back to your app, and then you are signing. Bearer token, also there's no per device preparation required, but we're not going to use that. Another common one is the named profile, which requires the client side to install the AWS CLI for developers. Now the main difference on this one is you do not need the user to run the AWS config SSO interactively. The command is a wizard that writes a profile sensor to this location for macOS and this location for Windows. And you can distribute that file directly through your device management tooling instead. A profile that uses IAM Identity Center looks like this. Now for this to work, you're going to have your profile created first on AWS. And also, when you launch the app, it does not have the traditional login. The login only comes after you use the models directly, and that will trigger another browser sign-in. The recurring action for user is AWS SSO login with the profile, Claude Cowork, which opens a browser for IAM Identity Center signing and cache a token under this location. To remove that manual setup, some organization deploy a launcher that was a credential helper we saw previously that runs the AWS STS as the security token, get caller identity as a probe. Okay, so these are the two common ones, but we're going to focus on the in-app AWS signing. So let's move on to see how we're going to configure the app. What Claude recommends is you use a reference device, and you're going to go to the developer, config third-party inference on your Claude Desktop app, and do all these manually. And then you're going to export the settings for MDM. Now we already know all the settings we need. We will just use our agentic tool, Codex, to produce and package the file for us for the MDM. Now just a quick glance on what's required. So this is under the connection section. Set the inference provider to Bedrock and fill the Bedrock credential cards. Then there's all these fields. Some are required, some are not. As you can see, all these authentication method has appeared. If you look under your Claude Desktop, you can see all these in the settings. They don't need to be there because you're only going to pick one of them, right? We're not going to go with the bearer tokens. We're not going with the profile name. So if you look at that menu on your Claude Desktop, it might be a little bit confusing, but we know exactly what we need, right? We're going to do the in-app authentication. Under the models, we can add a model lists. So remember on the Bedrock, we have allowed all the models. That's called Sonnet. But here, this is the client-side configuration that we can tell exactly what the Claude model, what the Claude Desktop app can see, what model they can use. And then once you finish all that, click Export to reproduce a mobile config, which is a Mac OS configuration profile. And with the Windows, it's just register keys. So these are the only two files you need for MDM, whether you're going to use Jamf for Mac or Intune for Windows. So we are nearly ready to build our desktop configurations. Now on Claude Doc, they recommend you build a reference machine. Obviously you need an administrator right to your machine and do this configuration manually and export it. We are not going to do that. We know our settings, and we're just gonna get Codex to build configuration and possibly build a whole app package ready for MDM to deploy. Now, if you look at macOS and Windows, all the settings are same, equivalent. And these are called configuration keys. There are different sections, and under each section there are different settings, different key value pair. Under connection, we have the inference provider. So for us, we're going to choose Amazon Bedrock. Then you will have the models here using the inference profile ID, which talked about just before. This organization UUID is a deployment ID for your organization. So Anthropic can tell who is who, which one is which. Now, You may ask, my data should stay within my environment. Why it goes to Anthropic? That is correct. Your corporate data will stay within your environment among your user computers, your Microsoft tenant and AWS tenant, all within your corporate boundaries. However, Anthropic does collect some telemetry data, including token usages as a whole. Nothing mapping back to your users or certain groups, nothing like that. It's a very, very broad telemetry data. So this is what that's for, which also means this key is optional. You don't have to configure it. And moving on to the workspace restriction. Now, Claude Desktop has two tabs, Claude Cowork and Claude Code. So you can disable, hide them. You can hide them both. I don't know why you do that. And the egress host in the sandbox. Now, this is a app level network control for your Claude Desktop. Now, remember, in a corporate environment, I'm almost certain your network connections, your network control will be more strict than what Claude needs. Meaning, your Claude will probably don't work unless the network is relaxed for the Claude from network level. And your baseline is always your network level control from your VPNs, from your proxies, not your app level. But this could be useful for some people. This is an app level allow list. Then there's settings for building tools and the workspace folders. Moving on to the connectors and extension, this is important. Now, the way to make Claude Code or Claude Cowork magical is the connectors, is the data. Without the data, without expanding the capability of what Claude can read, your Claude is just another chatbot. And we do not need another chatbot. There's so many of them. So this is where all the expansibility comes in. Manage MCP server, where the user can add their own local MCP server. Desktop extension directories. These are all the good stuff. The unsigned extension, you probably want to reject that. And then here is the telemetry updates, open telemetry collecting endpoints, all the updates. You can control updates, very granular, not possible at the moment. You can only disable auto updates or allow the auto updates. Then there's usage limit, per device token cap. Now this is per device. I'm not sure whether you can use it as per user. We're looking into that. See whether we can do that with Amazon Bedrock. And then there's the plugins. You can publish plugins with a corporate. And then here, egress requirement. Now this is a read-only. This is not a control, but it is a read-only allow list that tells you what need to be allowed for your Claude to work properly. That's why there is a copy function and also download function that you can give it to your network team to tell them these are the minimum network endpoint need to be allowed, and you can test connectivity right within your app. Now here are the configuration we're going to do for this demo. We've got the inference provider, which is Bedrock, and then inference credential, that option, the authentication path we selected is interactive. You got the region, you got endpoint, this back to our policies. This is the permission set name. Now we are not doing the Bedrock base URL for our demo. However, in an enterprise environment, especially for regulated industry, I'm almost certain you will have VPC set up in your AWS. In that case, you're gonna use your base URL. You're gonna modify DNS. In your VPN setup, your network setup, your base URL for your VPC will need to be allowed. So make sure you do all that. And then we will have a model set to AU inference profile, in which case we are gonna hit a public endpoint as opposed to the VPC private endpoint. And we are enable the co-work desktop, we're both enabling them. Auto mode disable, we'll probably want to disable the auto update for most cases. And then we'll leave the co-work ingress allow list on set. Okay, telemetry updates. These you can all change it if you don't like them. Disable auto updates, right? It's not disabled at the moment. You probably want to do that. And then there's the usage limit, which is device based, and appearance. I didn't know you can configure this. Anyway, so for MDM, it will be written to your hard disk as a com.anthropic.claude for desktop. Windows registry key will be written to the local machine software policies Claude. Okay, so what we're gonna do next is we're just gonna throw all this back to the codex and ask to produce the profile for us. And then we will actually use codex to create a package for us as well, so we can upload it. So if you look towards the right, the step number 6, it's pretty simple. You're gonna have two packages. One is your MSI for the actual Claude software, and then you have the registry configuration we just did, and scope to the same group that's having access to AWS Bedrock. For the macOS, you're gonna have DMG for the applications. You're gonna have your configuration profile in the mobile.config, and then you deploy them to the same group using Jamf or Intune. Please create configuration for Mac and Windows so I could review. Then I will supply the file for application packaging. And let's see what the result from Codex. Okay, that's done. Let's see if we actually can open this within Codex. So this is .mobile config for our Mac OS. And these are all the keys. And our tenant details, models, all there. I'm not gonna go through them one by one. We have to test whether it works. And this is the registry for our Windows machines. Exact same details, and we will deploy using Intune as well. Okay, so next we're gonna try to provide a packaging file to Codex and let it create a package for Intune. So let's take an example of Windows. I've supplied the MSI for Claude, and here's my prompt. This is my downloads, and use that to create a line of business applications. Use PowerShell script for the managed configuration. And also we need another script or configuration to enable the virtual machine platform on Windows. Now this is mentioned in the Claude co-work documentation that virtual VM support is required. And then I posted a Claude documentation and also Microsoft documentation on how to package MSIX file, just in case. Once completed, upload directly to Intune and assign to our Windows group. Let's see how long it's gonna take, and then we'll come back to the Intune portal to check it. While we're waiting, let's quickly go through the rest of the documentation. So these are the configuration file we already have, and it's built in the package for us. Now, what's this? Creating profiles for multiple user groups. So you might want to create different configurations for different audience. The configuration window can hold multiple named configuration. Use the picker in the top right of the window. So this sounds like a picker within the Claude Desktop app that you can select different configuration if you're allowed. Now we don't need to do that because we are using MDM, and when we deploy in MDM, it will have different profile for different groups, right? So like here says, in your MDM scope each exported profile to the corresponding device or user group. Targeting is handled by your MDM. That's exactly right. So this is not part of your deployment flow. We do not need that. Move on. That's the network egress, which is very important. The hosted app needs to reach depend on the configuration you built. Your inference provider endpoint is always required for us, which is the bedrock. Each telemetry update service settings you leave enabled as its own host. Configuration window shows the exact allow list for your settings and can export it as text file for your network team. And I can show you what the text file is. It can be found under your Claude Desktop app. Now, if we have a look at this detailed list for co-work on 3P, required egress path. These are what's always required. So perimeter firewall, your corporate network controls what device can reach. The host name below are what you allow this here. That's right. So you need to provide all these lists to your VPN, to your network proxies to get them allowed. Allow egress allow list. Co-work egress allow host. Key control that what agents, web fetch, shell tools can reach. This is independent of or stricter than the parameter. So this is the app level egress allow list. You don't have to use it when you have network level control. So this is independent or stricter than the parameter. The egress requirements section of the in-app configuration, so which is this one, co-work egress allowed hosts in-app configuration, is the authoritative source for deployment. It computes the exact allow list from your current settings updates as you change them. So you will have your network level of allow lists, control lists, and then if you configure this in-app co-work egress allowed hosts, this is even stricter than your network settings. I don't think you need that in a corporate environment. Your network control on your VPN, on your proxies are pretty tight already. You need to open ports to make a cloud co-work to work. Right, so what I'm saying is even without this in-app configuration for the egress, your app probably not going to work because your network control is already very strict. Okay, and you can see what's always required. Downloads.claude.ai is always required. It is for the VM Workspace bundle and the Claude CI library, fetched as session start, which means this is not something you need, or you only need to install or deploy the app. Every time you start a new session, it needs to reach out to the downloads.claude.ai. So this endpoint is always required. Without this, co-work session cannot start. Then you have your inference provider. For us will be Bedrock. So these are the endpoint you need for your Bedrock. There's inference Bedrock base URL. There's control plane STS token for the security token and AWS SSO. Now, we are not using, in our demo, we are not using the inference Bedrock URL. So this is a public host name which we are using, and you see previously we're using the host in Sydney and Melbourne. We don't need to define that. They are the public hosts. When we define our model, it will route freely, depends on your location, between the Melbourne and Sydney hosts. That is what the cross region mean, and that is what the public inference profile do. Now, if you're not using the public inference profile, you are using this inference Bedrock URL, which means you are running under the private network. So this is highly possible for many of you there in a controlled environment in your enterprise, especially for the regulated industry. You're most likely running private network, VPC endpoint inside AWS, and your firewall, your VPN will have strict lists that only point the traffic through to your private network in AWS. In that case, you will need inference Bedrock base URL. But in our demo, we're skipping that. And then auto updates, you can turn it on or turn it off. Essential telemetry, These are the reportings. You might want to consider turn them on. And then the non-essential telemetry, non-essential service, optional features. And you can also disable all the Anthropic bounded connections. With this, the desktop application makes no outbound connections to Anthropic operator host at runtime. And only required egress is downloads.claude.ai. Okay, so it looks like this might be something you want to do for your enterprise environment. Just turn off all the egress to the Anthropic, because you are running your inference from Bedrock, for example. Now, I previously said Anthropic will collect some telemetry data, such as token usage, but not any of your corporate data or the user informations. But if you don't even want that, you can turn these on. And also remember the UDID, the deployment organization ID I mentioned before. You probably don't need that either. Okay, moving on, there the proxy support. You might want to take that to your network team. Back to our Windows machine, you can see the installation has completed. So if we check the registries, you can see on the local machine software policies, Claude, there's a folder for that, and that's all your settings there. And the installation folder, you can also check, is under the app data local, or maybe on roaming, depends on how you deployed it. There is a Claude-3p folder, which is where all the installation files are. Okay, so let's start Claude, and let's log in. Here is signing with AWS. It should pop up a single sign-in window. So this bit is authenticating with our AWS IAM Identity Center's Entra applications that are registered with us. Okay, so we can close this window. Single sign-on completed. Let's see whether we can sign into Claude via Amazon Bedrock, managed by us. Failing. That's weird because the first handshake was successful. So what we're going to do, we're going to do some troubleshooting. So by go to your menu, help, and just go to troubleshooting, you're going to go generic diagnostic report. Once we got that, we'll throw back to our agentic tool and do some troubleshootings. Okay, so we figured out what the problem was. Remember when we used the model for the very first time from Bedrock, we had to submit a business case. Now, once you submit it, that is instant approved. However, under this request access to model page, you can see there are more things we need to do. The prerequisite to use the model is you're going to add the 3 permissions: marketplace permission, Anthropic models, and also payment method. Now we've got Anthropic models, we've also have the payment models, but under this marketplace permissions, we need to grant the 3 permissions: subscribe, unsubscribe, and view subscriptions to our permission set. So go back to your permission set, edit it. Under the inline policy, now we have added these marketplace model access bootstrap with these 3 permissions. So we're gonna go save the change and try the Claude again. As you can see, our Claude Desktop app is already start streaming response from our LLM. And I'm just sending another prompt. Looks like the model is responding. So this is how we can configure our Claude Bedrock with our desktop app. In this part 1 video, we have learned the basic foundation of setup Claude on Bedrock. In the next part, we will discuss Bedrock Guardrail, M365 connector, Office adding, and more. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching and see you next time.